homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. I am making today an apple crisp. And the fun part of this recipe, apple crisp is always fun and delicious, is that this recipe is something I've been making for well over 30 years. It came from an old boyfriend of mine who came from Wisconsin, and this was his Wisconsin grandmother's recipe for apple crisp. I've adapted it slightly. I tend to like a lot more apples and a little bit less crisp than what the original recipe called for because I'm all about the fruit. I'm always a little miffed when I order a dessert in a restaurant like a crumble or a crisp or a cobbler, and it's way more dough than it is fruit. And so in this recipe, my suggestion from how it's originally written would be to do at least half again as much apples as what the recipe calls for. And then the crisp itself, I make it in the food processor. It is a combination of brown sugar, butter, oats, a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg. And I like to make it up, and instead of putting the entire recipe on one batch of crisp, I freeze about half of it. And this is really handy if you just want to do a couple single servings. And so sometimes in the evening for dessert, I'll just chop up a couple of apples, toss them with a little bit of cinnamon, throw them in a heat-proof bowl, throw a quarter to a half cup of this on top and throw them in my toaster oven. And we have individual servings of apple crisp where I don't have an entire tray of it sitting around tempting me to eat it all, which is, of course, what I want to do. And so this freezes beautifully, and you can do individual servings instead of doing a large batch. But this recipe is tried and true. I've literally been using it for over 30 years, and it's absolutely delicious, and I highly recommend it. Let's get started.
So this is really a simple crisp recipe, and you can mix this by hand if you need to. I like to do mine in a food processor. So I have a cup of brown sugar, 3/4 of a cup of all-purpose flour, 1 stick of butter, and it should be basically right out of the fridge. So a little bit cool, not melted and warm. A stick is a half a cup. Teaspoon of cinnamon, teaspoon of nutmeg, and I like to mix all of this together before I add my oats so that the blade is not chopping my oats into little tiny bits. So give that a good stir. And you want a little bit of pebbly quality here, and then I'm adding 1.25 cups of whole rolled oats and just giving that enough pulse so that it's thoroughly blended, but don't overmix it. And then the original recipe calls for 4 Granny Smith apples. These happen to be Honeycrisp because we happen to have a Honeycrisp tree right now. And I'm using 8 because these apples are pretty small. And because Honeycrisp is a really firm apple and it doesn't break down when it's baking, I should have cut these up a little bit more than I did. I left them in these bigger chunks, and with the half-hour baking time, they were still pretty firm. And so you can either cook it a little bit longer or just cut those into little thinner slices. This is a little bit more cinnamon, a little bit more nutmeg, some dash of sugar, and a little bit of lemon juice just to prevent browning. And I'm just eyeballing this. You can add as much or as little as you want. A lot of times I don't even add additional sugar. I'm spraying down my 8x8 baking tin. This happens to be a stoneware piece that I picked up at a garage sale and was very excited about. In go the apples. And then I'm only using about half of this crisp topping on here. You could use the whole thing if you wanted to. I wish I'd had a few more apples in here too. It was a little bit light on the apples, but do whatever your heart and your tummy desires. And then that goes into an oven at 325 for about a half an hour. I keep forgetting to take this pizza stone out of the oven, and I turn my oven on and then it's hot, so I can't take it out, which slows down the baking just a little bit. And then in a half an hour, your crisp is ready to go. This is a really quick and easy recipe. Get a little bit of browning on there. Apples should be nice and warm and bubbly. And I usually serve this with a little bit of vanilla ice cream. We didn't happen to have vanilla ice cream on hand. And so in this particular case, I'm just giving it a nice squirt of whipped cream and calling it good. We ended up eating about 3/4 of this pan in one evening because it is so yummy and we couldn't resist. And if you needed it for a bigger crowd, you could easily just double the recipe and use a 9x13 pan. And that's all there is to it. Delicious. Give this old tried and true recipe a try, tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe, and share. I have new content coming out every week.